with our panel of experts from BIMTM. We've got Jeff Drews, Alex Hanna, and Jared Sutliff today. So that being said, we'd love to have your participation. Throughout the webinar, we are going to be launching polls, so we'd love to hear your opinion on these different BIM topics. You can also participate by submitting questions. So I'll go over how to do that in just a second here. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded and we'll forward the recording to all registrants. You can also find more recordings of Evolve webinars at our YouTube channel. All right, so you're going to have two options today for submitting questions. The first will be using the Q&A feature in your Zoom toolbar where you can type out your question. If you want to submit a question anonymously, that's the best way to do that. Option 2 is to virtually raise your hand. To do this, you'll go to the meeting webinar controls and click the reactions button and then click raise hand. There should be a little hand emoji. So if our hosts select you, you may be prompted to unmute yourself, and this will allow our audience to see your name, just as a heads up. So those are going to be the two options for participation today. And so with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to our panel of experts, and I'll launch this first poll for us.
Sounds great. Thanks, Marina. I'm Jeff Drews. I'm one of the co-founders here at BIM Technology Management. We're really excited for today's webinar. I think this is a first for all of us here at BIMTM to do something that's Q&A and have it a little bit more interactive. So again, I'm Jeff Drews, and I'm here with Jared Sutliff and Alex Hanna today. So Alex, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Alex Hanna. I'm the BIM regional lead out here in the West, home basing out of Boise, Idaho. And, I come back from a background in mechanical and plumbing, and I'm glad to be part of the panel right now. So,
and I'm Jared Sutliff, one of the co-founders of BIM Technology Management, and specialize in MEP systems. And that's one of the things that we really want to talk about here today is how our specialties and what we do can really help benefit you guys, and I'll learn from a lot of the stuff that we've made mistakes on and learned from in the past.
Yeah, so today we're going to focus on BIM implementation and I guess lessons learned, maybe some common misconceptions. So we have a poll that's up right now. Just where are you at with your BIM implementation? Feel free to answer that and we'll get rolling into some of our first topics. But again, at any time, feel free to submit a question. We want to try to keep this as interactive as possible. So I guess to get the ball rolling here, I think one of the most common misconceptions around BIM is that it's just a software. And obviously, shouldn't say obviously, it's not true. Revit is a tool, it's a software within the BIM process workflow. But I guess Alex, Jared, what have you come across as other misconceptions or other things regarding software, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard that we do BIM and it's just Revit. And also, like, the misconception of BIM is it's a process from estimation to project management, down to the engineering team, to the drafting and modeling team, all the way down to the fabrication shop floor, all the way to site, and all the way through construction and facility maintenance. So it's just like BIM is a process, and it's not a specific software or tool.
And some of the stuff that I've run into is very similar to that as well, where BIM is only meant for coordination. So it's only for clash detection, making sure that we've got a clash-free model. Well, that's all well and good, but why not utilize that information for more than just that? So you can take it and have some of the families and stuff be part of the design aspect that rolls right into coordination, which those same families can roll right into prefabrication and facility management as well. So it's all about bringing a lot of that stuff together instead of keeping it as independent silos.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing around that is, yes, it's a software, but it's also a communication tool. So it really helps to break down barriers between departments. And honestly, it's one of the only tools that's utilized in all departments in the company. I mean, if fully implemented. So your estimators can utilize it for counts. Your BIMTM obviously will utilize it for design documents, coordination, and that type of thing. Then your field team has that in their hands as well to be able to utilize it for modeling and or for installation and other things.
Well, and so we've got the results of our first poll here. So where are you at with your BIM implementation? So 9% of you said that you're thinking about it. 30% said that you can use some improvement. 26% are committed but struggling, and 35% of you out there are immortal.
So I'm
So-
curious what questions you guys have that are, committed to struggling or can use BIM improvement. Even thinking about it, like what's stopping you guys from actually going through and doing that process. So please put your
And
questions in there.
Alex, I guess to keep the ball rolling as far as could use some improvement or committed to struggling. What are your thoughts around BIM education as a whole?
Yeah, I think the biggest flaw that I see is when companies start implementing BIM is not having the proper education or training on the software they're implementing, or they're implementing the software, giving it to a guy to set up, and now that person is in charge of making sure all the BIM processes run smoothly. Think about implementing Revit. If I hand someone just Revit software and say go with it, right? There's going to need some basic training involved. You're going to have to understand how Revit works, and then how to set up the templates, and then why project templates are important, and even the little things why filters are important, and schedules with conditional formatting. And so a lot of these things that I'm talking about may sound like Spanish to a lot of you guys, but these things are important to implement to increase productivity. Because if you're not doing a lot of that stuff, you're basically just using Revit or another software not to its full advantage. So I think lack of education of the software and then how it's supposed to work actually specifically for your process is a huge gap, I would say, when implementing BIM, or I'm talking Revit now. If you're implementing Revit, which is probably the most common thing we're talking about now, when you're implementing Revit, if you don't have proper training or education on how to implement what you're implementing for and how it works through the process, that's going to be a big gap in your productivity.
I'll add one piece to that too, is you could have 3 BIM rock stars on your team, but if you aren't doing things the same way, it's going to be like a bunch of ants just scurrying in different directions. So you need to have some standard operating procedures and some documentation to back up what everybody's doing to keep them on the same page.
Yeah, definitely having some SOPs, a handbook that says you're going to use this template on this view every time you send it out, or even like dialing in your view templates to show exactly what you need and how it works with families within your view, and shared parameters and project parameters and how those schedule. Like connecting all that stuff, putting it into your project template is just, I mean, it's massive. It's talk about productivity. Like when you get that dialed in, you're cruising. So.
And even on top of that as well, so you've got that documentation and stuff. So then when you bring on a new team member, there isn't confusion. You don't have one person training one way, somebody telling them something different. And that even rolls into working with the field teams. If you've got a foreman that works with 2 different team members, it's not a completely different process each time or on each project.
Right. And I mean, Revit again specifically, that's a massive software. So like everyone understanding everything about it, you're going to have some specialists and specialties in there. Not everyone's going to understand everything about it. So it takes a team to build that process as well. So again, I see a lot of people give it to a person and they're in charge of implementing. And if that person's not reaching out for suggestions or training or more education on it, they're going to miss some big steps, some big productivity savers,
I guess let's get into some of the other like common misconceptions around BIM a little bit. Maybe not misconceptions, but what are some of the common pitfalls? Sorry, that's the right terminology there. That people get into when they first get into Revit. And Jared, I know we've seen this with a lot of clients in the past, overcomplicating models. What have you seen specifically regarding overcomplicating models or how that ties into doing BIM more efficiently or effectively.
Yeah, so overcomplicating models, a lot of things dealing with level of development or level of detail, 400 fabrication level. How specific do you really need to get? From our experience, from an electrical standpoint, having the rod and each of the different washers and the lock nuts and all how that all ties into piece of unistrut and having the strut straps and any sort of like one holes or everything. Modeling all of that doesn't give you any more advantage. I mean, sure, yeah, you can get accurate counts to every part and piece that you're going to need on a project, but for the time that it takes to get all of that modeled in and then have it be a part of the schedules and get that information down to the shop that then gets translated out to the field, is it really worth that time when the people in the shop already know what those are? They know how to utilize them. The same with the guys in the field. They understand the code. They know where it has to go. So you spend all that time and provide dimensions, let's say for like one holes on a wall. They're not going to follow that. It's going to take more time to look at the drawing and do that. So
I'm going to argue one piece with that.
Okay.
I mean, I think that would be very firm specific. So
true.
I think the right approach here is model effectively with a purpose. So make sure we're not modeling to a 500 LOD if nobody has any intentions of fabricating downstream, because it's just going to be a waste of money. So I think it's starting with the end result in mind. Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into that, but a lot of times when people first get into BIM and Revit, they want to model every little thing under the sun, and then all of a sudden their budgets get way out of control and BIM costs so much money. So I think it really goes back to what are we using this BIM model for, and making sure that we're modeling for that specific purpose.
Right. I like what you said about moving through Revit with a purpose. Like when you're putting items within Revit or 3D modeling in general, you want to place items with like a purpose and reasoning, rather than kind of throwing them in there that looks good, or like hitting endpoint to endpoint. I'm pretty sure everyone's kind of heard this saying, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you're going to use your model effectively, you have to build your model effectively. So I like how you said that.
So we do have not really a question, but a comment.
You have to hit answer live.
Oh,
Really?
Well, I'll go through it first and then answer it. So people designing in a silo with old school drafting mentality is their biggest struggle. They're more worried about what the paper deliverable is than modeling things in Revit so that the deliverable essentially makes itself.
Jared, if you hit answer live, or it'll actually show, I believe it'll show the answer on the screen then.
Okay. Maybe I have to answer.
Marina, sorry, 1 second. Is it if we hit answer live like that, they can see it on the screen?
Yes.
All right.
Perfect. So and this goes back to one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier as well, utilizing the software as a tool that can go from design to coordination to fabrication to like facility management is tough to wrap your head around, because the way that it's been done is construction drawings happen, then construction happens with RFIs, and it goes back and forth, but it's more of a separate silo. So being able to work on merging those together is going to really create some efficiencies and really make BIM what it's intended to do.
And I think that kind of goes back to the BIM education a little bit too. It isn't necessarily knowing how to use Revit, but it's everyone being involved in the process needs to at least have a high level understanding of how it needs to work and how it works and how it doesn't work, so that we can effectively break down those silos and maybe get away from that old school drafting mentality. With that being said, I've worked with a lot of old school engineers in my day, and they like to see things a certain way. So it might take a little bit a little bit more convincing for some.
Persuasion, yeah.
Yeah, persuasion.
Yeah.
I think we got another question. Ledger.
So this one, transferring as-built back from a contractor that utilizes fabrication is not a seamless transition. So what tips would we suggest to integrate shop fabrication models for design consultant that is not matching? So if they are not in the fabrication side, one of the things that's going to be very important to have as a part of this is in engaging them with the fabrication side. So they've got the design in mind, but then when you're actually using fabrication parts, the locations may not fit, or the elevations may not be able to be exactly where they want them to be. And like design equipment doesn't necessarily match what was spec'd and you've got for submittals. So that'll change some of the design. So engaging with them and just having short meetings with them to show them what has changed and get their approval on it. Then when it comes back to the design side to look at why it has changed, it's going to be a much more seamless transition.
Yeah, even if you have like a separate model that's for coordination only, that is specific to moving around just the design model, so that the knowledge of fabricators coming in saying, hey, that design model looks great, but this corner's not going to work here. We got to do something different here. And having that model to go to fabrication and then back and forth is a lot easier than just taking a design model for what it is.
I think what she's getting into here though is transferring the as-built model back in. So it isn't even necessarily the design or the coordination model. It's how do we take what's actually built and adjust those changes in the model. And honestly, one of the best ways to do that is utilizing a 3D scanner. I mean, we can go up to a job site, scan it, bring that point cloud back into the model, and then we can just make adjustments as necessary from there.
Looks like there's a follow-up here. Go ahead. Creating an as-built drawing from the end result, especially if fabrication doesn't show CFMs, etc. Should have seen if we do something different here. Yeah, I mean, 3D scanning is a big one, especially if you're looking for exact as-builts from site. And then in that case, the fabrication model would still be separate, right? If you're gonna do as-builts to design model.
It's kind of a tricky question.
Yeah, I'm thinking
not a straightforward answer. It really depends on what kind of as-built things we're needing to change. And I guess the other question I would have around that is how significant are the changes from the coordination or fabrication models? Because I would hope that they're not significant. And does everything need to get integrated in the engineer of record? Or is that more on the subcontractors and, or I guess just the subcontractors?
Mhm.
Yeah, and with the fabrication doesn't show CFMs or any of that other detailed information. That would be, I guess, being able to look back at the design model sizes and just make sure that they line up with the fabrication model, which they should. Because that's what you're coordinating. And if there are any like RFIs or any changes to that size, then in the coordination efforts, that would be captured. So
They always make changes in the field though.
always. All right, so we've got our next poll up here. So what does the current buy-in from your leadership look like? Are they stuck in their way, not wanting to change, hesitant, only utilizing it when a BIM is required on a project, cautiously optimistic, they see the potential, but not sure really where to start and where to go, or all in, let's rock and roll?
So I think that's a good poll. That is definitely one of the common challenges when implementing BIM is how do you get buy-in from leadership to really do what needs to be done? Alex, I will point that question at you and see what are some of the ways that we can more easily get buy-in from leadership when we're trying to really make some changes in and have BIM as a part of the culture of an organization instead of just a necessary evil.
Right. Obviously, it's going to take time and it's slow integration. So you might do parts and pieces first. And it may be something as simple as, Procore getting to the PM and documents are on one spot to then implementing Revit in engineering, which is probably the highest cost, I would think, initially. But the back end savings, there's a bunch of case studies out there showing the savings of working within Revit over AutoCAD, the amount of changes and stuff you have to do, the revisions, the integrations to site and the shop floor. And yeah, buy-in is really hard, especially if they are stuck in their ways. It's kind of you kind of gotta fight for it. But again, if you can show those case studies of implementation of maybe competitors doing it, and so they're getting this far ahead, and so like you need to be on par, or jobs are coming in, and then you can't bid on them because you're not doing this certain thing. So there's other things you can do for that. But it does look like, based on the poll results, that no one's stuck in their way. So that's good to know. It's really great, because then there's hope.
There's a lot of rocking and rolling. That's
really awesome.
Yeah, that's great to see.
The other thing I would say with that is develop a roadmap and make that roadmap visible, and try not to do everything at once. So
Yes.
Prove the concept and add on to it bit by bit, but don't go for the home run hit right out of the park. Like, this is a big undertaking, and make sure that you're not biting off more than you can chew. I guess, Jared, you got anything else to add about leadership buying? Or
Well, and so one of the other things as well is, as most of us are aware because we're in the BIM side, is that BIM has a large upfront cost, or a bigger upfront cost. And so if you're looking at the weekly numbers and not looking at the big picture and what the efficiencies gained downstream, you won't realize the ROI until the very end, when you're looking at your final numbers and, like the hourly composite rate for the field team. So that's one thing that a lot of ownership and a lot of management, they only see that cost right up front, and then forget about it at the end of the job when, their numbers come in. It's like, hey, we kicked this out of the park. And then they forget about the BIM aspect that helped streamline that process.
the other thing I'll add to that too is it might not be leadership. It might not be leadership that you're trying to get the buy-in from immediately. It might be you have to find some other. It's going to be your field person. We'll just put it that way. If you get your field person to buy into it, they're going to be the ones who are going to be advocating for you to do more for them. And then they're going to be screaming, wondering why they don't have BIM on every single job. So, I mean, Jared, what's your experience with that? Or Alex, what's your experience with that?
Well, I know.
Go ahead, Jared.
The first real in-depth project that I did was working with a foreman who this was his very first job. And so I had asked my manager at the time, I said, to make this process work really well and be able to utilize prefab with this, would it be all right if I spent 2 to 3 days a week coordinating and doing the modeling and all of that in the job trailer? And that way, the foreman that I worked with, and he's still a good friend of mine, he was able to see the process and have buy-in with the process. And I was able to ask him questions. And if I didn't understand something, we'd be able to go out on the job site and actually look at what they physically installed to help me understand how I could do the coordination efforts more efficiently and how it can really benefit the field team. And so after that project, he requested me on every single one of his other projects because that process worked so well, and I was learning from him, he was learning from me, and we were in it together for the long haul.
Yeah, and I remember leadership coming down and asking me, how do I get Jared on all those jobs after that? And I had to tell them that there was other foremen out there who needed help as well. So
yeah.
I do see we have another question, and that seems like a familiar name, huh?
Yes, it does. So
you know the one under.
Yep. So Sam asked, how do we prevent frustration and burnout when trying to implement BIM? How long does it typically take to be efficient with BIM and prefab? So, that there's a lot that goes into that. you're doing a lot of pre-planning and working with the shop, and what they do and how they do it can also inform the BIM side of things as well, because we don't want to produce a set of drawings and the shop looks at it and goes, what the hell is this? We can't do anything with that, or why isn't this here? Why isn't that there? So having that open dialogue and communication with them to help develop standards with prefab along with BIM will help prevent a lot of those frustrations. The burnout side of things, I mean, that all depends on how many projects you have and what you're trying to implement and lack of communication. And so
I think that kind of goes back to a plan as well, making sure that if you want to prevent burnout, make sure that everyone's on the same page and you're not biting off more than you can chew.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, having a team to help implement, like even if it's internal, if it's higher up and managers and stuff, definitely helps with the burnout. All landing on one person's shoulders to implement. And then obviously, depending on your process and internally what you're doing, from an architectural firm to engineering to like a prefab, MEP contractor shop, like what you guys are doing, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to just model it and put some cut sheets out, or you're trying to connect into machines in the fab shop, if you're trying to automate a lot of things, those come over time. So implementation, like the beginning of it, yeah, there's some standard setups you got to do, but over time that implementation grows. So it's not like, okay, it's implemented hands off. A lot of it is, okay, the shop needs this today, or it would be really great if we could do this. And then you start cracking into BIM and using shared parameters and exports to start running machines, or starting to send cut lists out automatically to your guys at the chop saw who are measuring cutting. So
the one thing we didn't really touch on is how long does it take to implement BIM? That really is dependent on your goals and your way of going about doing it. So if you want to try to implement BIM out of the box Revit, you're going to be creating all kinds of custom families, and you're going to be spending a lot of time developing processes and procedures. If you want to cut some corners and do things efficiently, you can purchase tools like Evolve MEP, and you can bring BIM consultants like BIMTM on to kind of help you hold your hand along the process.
Yeah, that definitely helps with burnout.
So we've got another poll here. So what is your specific BIM skill set? I've opened Reddit once on accident, and yes, we purposely called it Reddit instead of Revit. I've got a year or so under my belt. I've been on multiple projects, or I'm a master spellcaster. What do you mean? I'm not lame. I'm silly fun.
So there's a question here. Are there certification programs available that can help validate our team's BIM knowledge to our leadership? I mean, there are some tests out there to kind of see where people's BIM level is. I know Evolve has one as well.
I'd be cautious about BIM level. I think there's lots of tests out there that can test your Revit level. So software skills.
Yes.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to speak over you on that one, but yeah, there's lots of tests around Revit, but BIM as a whole is really a totally different animal that I don't think there's really any great certifications around at the moment.
Thank you for the clarification. Yes, Revit, not BIM.
There's Autodesk tests, there's Evolve MEP tests, and you get a pretty good gauge on somebody's soft skills, but are they really able to put it all together is a totally different thing.
Yeah.
So we've got the poll results back. 3 of the attendees have opened Revit once on accident. 10 of them have a year under the belt, 14 are multiple projects, and 9 of you are spellcasters and well-versed in BIM. So for this, obviously, like anything, the more that you work on, the more that you do, the more that you learn from experience, the better off you're going to be. And so it's one of the reasons that we started BIM technology management, as well as to be able to help with the educational piece on that and help prevent burnout, so that you have a good, strong team that decides and they want to stick with that specific company. I know for me, my Revit experience was more on a rudimentary, more just kind of visualization and originally, and then when I started working with Jeff, I mean, it just went exponential. And I know just a ton from, you know, the site work that I was a part of and also working with Jeff over the last 6-7 years here.
So you've got another question.
All right, so we got Jacob, who's currently working through establishing a new BIM workflow with Evolve implementation. We have a sample workflow for us to compare the two, namely inserting Evolve families, setting up conduit types and fittings, etc.
I don't know that we have anything necessarily that we can share in this webinar in particular. I think mostly what we're going through today is going to be more about the BIM process as a whole and not necessarily about how to bring things into, like, Evolve families into a project. I think there'll be future webinars for that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other things too with is, you know, comparing different workflows, there will be similarities for sure, but ultimately the workflow is what works best for you and your company. So understanding where you guys need more information versus less, and depending on what your standards that you develop are, is going to change a little bit of what that workflow looks like as well. So we've got another question here. What training or skill development opportunities are available for MEP contractors who want to answer or enhance their proficiency? What other resources are there?
Alex, what do you think about that one?
I mean, obviously they can call Evolver and us and get some training on that. But I mean, for opportunities to develop skill, that's MEP contractors, every MEP contractor works differently. Everyone has a different workflow. So obviously, whatever your workflow is and what you're implementing, if you're trying to train on standardization or within your company, you know, it really depends on how many jobs you got going on, what that workflow is. To enhance proficiency, it's just, you know, going through your projects and clicking on buttons you never clicked on before, you know, especially within Revit. And then obviously, you know, there are advanced classes that you can take that do help with kind of development of those skills for your MP contractors. So I know we do have some trainings like that as well on our side we can help with as well. Trying to think of other sort. I mean, there's obviously you can go to the local college and take some of those classes if you want. A lot of that's out the book stuff. So it's not necessarily training for what you're currently doing. A lot of it is like to pass another certification test.
And I think another way to do that is just become more involved. If there happens to be like a local chapter of MEP professionals that get together, like in Milwaukee, we've got what we call VDC MKE, and we reached out to all the local MEP contractors and even members of the AEC community as well, to get together once every other month to be able to talk about best practices. What have you learned? What has worked for you? And we bring industry professionals in to do a small presentation on lean construction or being able to streamline processes, other like softwares available, and Revit plugins that can really help streamline a lot of the processes as well. And then you start developing those relationships, and then you can ask them questions. Hey, have you ever run into something like this before? And then you can talk about it even outside of those group meetings.
I guess my opinion on that is there aren't a lot of great resources out there currently. Like Alex said, you can go to technical school or technical college and you can learn some soft skills. They really aren't specific to MEP contractors as a whole. So if you want that additional support, you're going to be looking for a BIM consultant who specializes in MEP contracting, who can really come in and give you a tailored solution to help you for your specific need. There's some other questions in there now.
So, what is the best way to find a localized VDC or BIM group? I mean, I would say LinkedIn is going to be an excellent resource, but that's also dependent on if those localized groups have a LinkedIn presence.
They are a little tricky to find, to be honest, sometimes. I know a lot of the bigger cities like Chicago and Atlanta, and I don't really know where else, but they've been developing these BIM groups, but to try to find something that's specific to the MEP industry, it's a little bit more challenging. So maybe try and get a bunch of people together and try creating one yourself. It's some work, but there's a lot of value to it for sure.
And just utilizing LinkedIn as a resource for, you know, a MEP BIM answers or best practices. There's a lot of great people out there that do provide a lot of good information, and there might even be some additional webinars and things that you can attend. And even if it's not a localized group, maybe even a virtual group, to continue talking about those best practices and what you've learned. And it's also nice to learn about other areas, because each state has slightly different code requirements. And so if you end up getting a project in that state, then, you know, utilizing that resource to learn about what needs to change.
Right. And I know that like big groups like AGC also hold trainings and stuff on BIM that you can probably pick some stuff up too. So again, like Jared said, finding a group locally or finding one online is going to be a good bet. And even talking to some other contractors in your area, you know, that doesn't hurt too. Kind of see what kind of workflow they're got, and maybe it brings a light bulb, or maybe it's not for you. So
we have another question that has come in here, and
Kind
we'll
of seems like an evolved specific one though, unless we're looking for something.
So I know that the next poll had popped up here, and while you're answering, does your BIM department have someone who knows how to modify Revit families and templates in-house? We will kind of dive into Matt's question here a little bit. So for the project that he's working in, make shop drawings for every instance that's placed in Revit. Any auto dimensioning software or plugins that can recommend to make sheet creation and detailing more efficient. As Jeff had said, seems like it's more of an evolve question, because they do have some auto spooling. It does take some setup to get it to produce exactly what you want. But with any automation process, there is always going to be cleanup, and you're going to have to review it to make sure that it's getting the right information that you need.
yeah.
And a comment, Boo Tooley says, find me on LinkedIn. Oh, boo, dang. So I'll put this one in there as well. So you can find him on LinkedIn, always looking to make connections for going over BIM for electrical. All right. So we got another one. RF Tools works for mass sheet creation.
I don't have a lot of experience with that one, but I've heard good things about it as well.
All right, and our next poll, does your BIM department have someone who knows how to modify families and templates in-house? So we got the majority by quite a ways. 34 respondents here said that yes, you do. 5 of you say no, some maybe, not sure, and then just one of you has it outsourced. So the I guess, Jeff, any comments on? I mean, that seems like a lot to me, but
no, I mean, it's great to see. It's a little surprising based on some of the data I've seen in the past. Typically, I see that a little bit closer to the 50% mark for firms, especially if they're just trying to implement them. Actually, if they're just trying to implement it, it's way lower. But based on some of the polls that we've sent out in the past and gathered data, that's really high. That's awesome to see.
Yeah, it is. And maybe we just got the Rockstar crew here on this webinar, so.
That was good.
I guess kind of getting back into the implementation stuff. One of the common pitfalls I see of a lot of a lot of MEP contractors as a whole is not investing in the hardware or kind of pinching pennies around the software. I guess Alex or Jared, what does that do downstream for the department when maybe you decide to save $500 on a computer because it wasn't in the budget at the time?
Well,
Yeah,
I know from personal experience, we sent our spec recommendations for new computers for the team, and IT took a look at it and said, "Hell no, we're not spending that much," and cut down just the RAM alone. And so you'd get a very large project, and you're trying to fly through Navisworks, and you've got Revit open because you're working at the same time. And then you get the error that, oh, not enough memory, programs have to close. And, hopefully you have synchronized to central or saved your work. But having that crash happen a lot because they wanted to save $300. I mean, it wasted a rough guess, probably close to 300 hours of my time dealing with that over the years.
Yeah,
300 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 300 hours, not dollars, hours. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big chunk of time that, ended up taking away from other things that I needed to get to.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience as well. I remember calculating how many seconds it took to sync on old computers compared to a build I had. And it was taking like 2 or 3 minutes because these were gigabit, and he had a central model on a server with not SSDs, they're mechanical. So it took a bit. And then I remember pushing for hardware updates. We finally got it. And it went from like 3 minutes to like 15 seconds. And so I did a whole calculation of how many hours per month, per week, per year, or whatever. And it was some ridiculous amount of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that is actually a great point for, trying to get buy-in from the higher ups is like, hey, we just this one thing saved us so many hours of work. That's something you can prove as a statistic. Yeah. But I remember that specifically having a problem not having the right hardware definitely hindered us a lot.
Like, we have a question that kind of relates to that too. Looks like Jacob is asking about desktop or laptop recommendations. We do partner with the company, so feel free to reach out to us, but go on Autodesk's website. They have the minimum requirements for various types of models. So take that minimum requirement and then scroll way down the page until it says like your high performance models and use that as your minimum requirement.
Mhm.
Yeah, and part of the reason why you want to do that as well is it'll make you more efficient initially, but then you're also not going to need a new computer in a year or two. That computer will last you significantly longer, and thus, saving you on some hardware costs in the long run anyways.
Yeah, definitely.
So got a question, Matthew here has any advice for using Trimble points and implementing that into the modeling process, then exporting it in other software for installation. So
I mean, I'd pause for a second there and say, if you're already an involved customer, it already has Trimble integrations built into it. So there isn't any need for any additional licensing or anything like that. But we're not going to get too far into the specifics on that in this webinar, but it is there as a part of it.
And another question here, give a breakdown between the difference of using Revit families and an ITM database within Revit. Is one preferred over the other or a combination between the two? So, I mean, that I think is more indicative of the type of project that you're working on. The Revit system families work really well for getting the correct sizes. You can add insulation and those types of things to those
I'd pause
System
and say
families.
that's discipline specific as well.
Yeah, sorry, yes, discipline specific as well. So if the project you're working on only has a coordination requirement and you're not going to get into any sort of fabrication, you're taking up space and then the field team is utilizing that as their baseline to install from, there wouldn't be a need to integrate an ITM database with it. The great thing about an ITM database is you actually get like what can be the physical parts and pieces. So your offset is going to be true to size instead of being able to use the system families to create a much smaller offset works that way. But then when you get into the actual parts and pieces, it could be a lot bigger, thus causing you some other coordination issues down the line.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess I would say preference is more project specific and what the ultimate end goal is with the project itself.
Yeah, and another take on it too is how families and ITMs work within Revit. So obviously families are built into Revit and you can build families from Revit. So the database for whatever you're using for Revit can be adjusted and manipulated. ITM is built in a separate database in either CAMDuct or CAD MEP fabrication. So the database for that cannot be adjusted or fixed. It requires a separate software. So you kind of get that. I don't want anyone touching this stuff, so I put it in ITM so that no one can touch it or change it. Or I want the customization to do what I want with families, so I'm going to build everything in families as well. So that's not necessarily project specific, it's more management specific on how you want to handle that stuff as well. So
Looks like we're getting right about the end here. If there's any other questions, feel free to submit them now. Otherwise, I guess Alex, Jared, any final thoughts about BIM implementation as a whole? Or any other real important common misconceptions or common mistakes people make that you want to throw out there before the end?
yeah, definitely when you're modeling, model to what you need. Don't model excessively. Don't try and put every nut and bolt on it. I know we talked about that a little bit before, Jared, with hangers, but model to what's needed, not necessarily like every bit, because models in Revit can get pretty large.
And one of the other things too is kind of playing off of that. If you don't have to model every 3/4 inch pipe, but you've got, say, a grouping of them, you can work on modeling just like a box that would take up that space specifically that you know you're going to be in this area. So you don't have to model out every single pipe or clash out every single pipe. But that's dependent on the level of development and who is running the coordination and what the specific coordination requirements are for that project. But it is a good way to be able to coordinate efforts, and then your field team has a zone that they can stay within.
I guess my big thing is make sure you have a plan and make sure you understand what you're doing. And a part of that is ask a lot of questions. And I know a lot of people when they first get into BIM are afraid to sound stupid, and you're going to sound stupid. You just have to be able to get over it. And you're going to sound more stupid if you do it wrong and you're getting yelled at on the phone and you're getting asked to come down to the job site and figure out why something's the way it is. So if you create the plan ahead of time and you ask dumb questions, there's a higher probability of it being done right the first time. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Like, don't be afraid to sound stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
And
I asked a lot of stupid questions to get where I am today. So
yeah, for those that know me, you know that I ask a lot of stupid questions too.
oh, for sure.
And then there are a couple other questions in here, but since it's not quite dealing with the topic at hand, that's why we did not address those.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone who's been a part of this webinar today. I hope that you found the information valuable. Please make sure to go and follow Evolve and BIMTM on social media to keep up with all of our upcoming webinars, events, contents. And I do even believe there's some in-person meetups in the future for those of you looking for groups to connect with. You can always find more demos and past webinars on the Evolve YouTube channel. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, and we are going to forward the recording to all registrants. Thank you so much again, everyone, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.